Beast woman with night vision eyes says my smell. Lights are up inside. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Gavin adjusted his breath regulator as the bulkhead doors of the transport hissed open. A gust of cold rolled over him like a punch, though the airlock kept the true chill at bay. Even still, the transition from ship to station felt like stepping into the ribs of a sleeping beast. Boots flickered dimly in the curved corridor, and somewhere beneath the floor, ice groaned with the weight of ancient pressure. He'd been briefed on Outpost Halcyon's location, a research and monitoring facility, camouflaged under a frozen ocean on the night side of Lyria 9. But no amount of simulation training could prepare him for the bone-deep silence or the ominous creaks that echoed through the structure like whispers from the sea floor. His boots clipped steadily against the metal path as he was led down into the lower levels by a bored technician who spoke only in grunts and head jerks. The halls were low-ceiling and narrow, built for utility rather than comfort. Steam curled from cracked pipes and the scent of disinfectant didn't fully mask the metallic tang of coolant. He didn't ask questions. He'd learned early in his military career that the more secretive the location, the more disposable the personnel. But he wasn't here as a soldier this time, just system support, tech maintenance, heat shield diagnostics. He repeated the checklist to himself like a mantra, trying to ignore the itchy weight of his sidearm strapped under his jacket. Halcyon was supposedly non-hostile, fully automated, except for a small research crew. Yet even the paperwork felt half-redacted. They reached the central control module, a compact chamber walled by frosted glass and low-lit consoles. The tech waved him through and muttered something about orientation scheduled at 1600, then vanished down a side corridor without another word. Gavin was alone. He dropped his pack and examined the equipment. Some of it was cutting-edge, sensor arrays and deep pulse scanners he'd only read about in spec manuals. Others looked scavenged or hybridized with alien tech. That caught his eye. In authorized integrations, power relays tweaked beyond regulation. Strange power feedback loops not designed by any human manufacturer. He felt a tight knot form in his gut. Either someone was experimenting or someone was hiding something. As he reached for a diagnostic panel, the door behind him hissed open. She walked in like a shadow-given shape, tall, sleek, moving without sound. Her steps so light he felt more than heard them. Gavin turned, and for a heartbeat he froze. Not because she was intimidating, though she could have been. Not because she looked strange, though she did. But because the moment her eyes met his, they lit up. Literally. Her irises shimmered gold and orange like a dying sun caught in a snow globe. A slit pupil widened in reaction to him, and her chest rose with a sudden inhale. She stood upright like a human, but everything else said otherwise. Matte gray fur covered her body in subtle layers like velvet pressed smooth. Her limbs were long and defined, built for speed or climbing or both. A tail trailed behind her, ending in a softly glowing bulb of bioluminescence that pulsed as she stared. Her outfit, some kind of tight thermal suit laced with mesh, clung to her form but left mobility clear. She wasn't armed yet. Gavin's instinct spiked as if she was. "I smelled something new," she said. Her voice was smooth but not emotionless, like someone tasting a word before saying it. She didn't smile, didn't blink. She just studied him, eyes narrowing slightly as though calibrating. Gavin took a step back instinctively, then caught himself and planted his feet. Those Engineer Gavin Cross just arrived from orbital. She tilted her head. "Your name means nothing to me." She stepped closer now, within arm's reach, her nostrils flared. "But your scent does." He raised an eyebrow. "I'll take that as a welcome." "Depends what kind of heat you bring," she said, and for the first time her tail twitched with something between amusement and curiosity. "You smell warm." The way she said it made him feel like a fresh meal placed too close to a hungry animal, yet strangely not threatened. Not quite. He'd faced worse. People who smiled while they lied, officers who barked orders with dead eyes. She wasn't lying. She didn't need to. "And you are?" he asked. "Analyze," she replied, voice softening. "Scout, Night Seer, specialist in movement tracking and low-temp navigation. I guard the vent corridors and keep the ocean quiet." He tried to remember her file. There had been mention of a non-human contractor genetically bonded to Arctic environments. Experimental integration project. He hadn't expected someone so articulate or so fixated. "I'm here to fix your failing heat dampeners and analyze base activity spikes," Gavin said, shifting the topic back to familiar ground. "I'd like to start diagnostics. Can you give me full system access?" "I could," she said, stepping even closer. "But I won't, not unless you let me study you first." "I'm not here to be studied," he replied firmly, but not aggressively. "Just point me to the malfunction." She circled him slow, her tail trailing like a radar dish. "When you walked in, your heat signature spiked every sensor in the hall. No one else does that. You're different. My pupils dilated the moment you breathed. That's never happened before." He crossed his arms, staring back. "Then maybe we both need answers." She stopped behind him, breath brushing his neck. "Maybe." The lights flickered. A low rumble passed through the floor, distant but unnatural. Gavin's instincts went sharp. He turned. She was already moving, tapping her wrist controls, scanning the tremors' direction. No panic, just intense, quiet focus. "What was that?" he asked. "Not tectonic," she said. "Not ocean shift either, something artificial." The ice groaned again, louder this time, and Gavin realized this posting was going to be anything but routine. Beside him, analyzed, tensed, her gaze locked on the corridor. She didn't move, but her tail lit a little brighter. "You're staying," she said. "You shouldn't, but you will." Gavin didn't answer. But in that moment, surrounded by darkness, sensors, and something ancient scratching beneath the ice, he already knew she was right. The tremor didn't come back, but the silence it left behind was louder than anything. Gavin worked through his diagnostics with an alert mind, tracking irregularities in the temperature regulation systems and power routing nodes that snake through the outpost like veins beneath skin. Something wasn't right. A loop in the thermal shielding code kept rerouting power spikes toward dead systems that were never meant to be drawing current at all. He ran the logs twice, then again with decrypted access, but parts of the readout were corrupted or intentionally wiped. No natural failure he'd ever seen did that. Whether the system had been tampered with or the base was hiding functions that didn't appear on his manifest, either way it made his gut twist. He hated being sent into half-lit rooms with half the truth, especially when the ice moaned outside like it knew secrets. He moved through the maintenance ducts quietly, ducking between junction points and sealing the panels behind him. Most of the crew kept to themselves, speaking in low tones, avoiding questions and rarely making eye contact. He tried greeting 2 engineers in the rec module and gotten blank stares in return, followed by quick exits. There was tension hanging in the air, not just because of the tremor, but something older. Like this outpost wasn't just buried under a sea of ice, but buried under secrets too. Gavin kept his pace steady. He dealt with covert missions before. The trick was figuring out what you weren't supposed to see, then finding the one person who didn't care about the rules. Luckily, she found him first. Analyze showed up without warning again, this time outside the communications annex. He didn't hear her approach, only felt the faintest static charge in the air before her presence clicked into place beside him. She crouched by a wall panel, hands resting on her knees, glowing eyes narrowed toward the conduit junction, like she could see the heat bleeding through it. When he glanced over, she didn't flinch or pretend she wasn't tracking his every movement. "You smell like ozone today," she said quietly. "Like cracked circuits and skin sweat? Are you nervous?" "I'm frustrated," Gavin replied, kneeling beside her. "Someone been screwing with the thermal code. I found a loop forcing heat into inactive wings, not accidental either." She nodded once, slowly. "I've noticed shifts in the vent signatures, subtle changes, not something a human would see, but I track movement by heat patterns, and someone's been moving in sectors that should be sealed." Gavin raised an eyebrow. Why hasn't Command said anything? She didn't answer. Instead, she tapped a section of the wall panel with her claw. A hatch clicked open, revealing a narrow crawl space lit by faint blue diodes. You want answers? Follow. He hesitated for a second, then climbed in behind her. The ductwork was tighter than it looked, especially with her tail weaving ahead of him like a living rope of light. She moved silently, guiding him through bends and forks, with simple hand gestures never stopping to explain. The deeper they went, the colder it got, until the frost began forming on the walls and his breath became visible, curling around her shoulder in tiny clouds. Finally, she stopped in motion for silence. Ahead, a slatted vent opened into a wide, cavernous chamber Gavin hadn't seen on any schematic. Through the slats, he saw ancient walls, dark stone fused with glowing latticework, pooling faintly with energy. Alien architecture, unmistakable. The lines were too perfect, too symmetrical in ways human minds didn't design. At the center of the room stood a massive pillar, etched with circuitry that hummed like a tuning fork in the back of his skull. Gavin didn't need to ask to know what it meant. "This wasn't built by us," he muttered. "No," Analyzed whispered. "It was already here. Halcyon wasn't constructed for research. It was built to cover this." He turned to her, brows tight. "Why keep it secret? This isn't just archaeology, that's a functional core of some kind. Energy like that. It's alive." Her tail coiled in a nervous twitch. "My people call these places heart temples. Old instinct tells me to kneel here, to worship, but something changed when you arrived. That hum, it's louder now, stronger. When you breathe near it, it pulses faster." Gavin stared back through the grate, nodding how the light rhythm mirrored the pattern of his heart. He tried to dismiss it, but the data didn't lie. His presence was triggering a reaction in something ancient, and no one had warned him. No one had even hinted. "I'm just a technician," he muttered. "I fix heaters and wipe logs. Why the hell would this thing react to me?" Annalise leaned and closed her breath, warm in the freezing duct. "Your scent lit my nerves the second you stepped off the shuttle. Not just attraction, activation. You walk different, move different. There's something in your blood that answers this place." Gavin's throat dried. "I'm not some chosen one." "I didn't say you were, but something chose you." Before he could respond, a sharp pulse rocked the structure. The core flared, then dimmed. Alarms blared above them. Annalise cursed in her native tongue and began backing out of the duct. Gavin followed, heart pounding. By the time they surfaced back into the hallways, the corridor lights were flashing red, and the base shook under their boots. They sprinted through the lower passageways, dodging sparking cables and panicked crew members. Annalise stopped briefly at an emergency panel, slamming her fist into the override and rerouting power to stabilize the outer shields. Gavin keyed into a side console, verifying the tremor's source. It hadn't been tectonic. It had come from within the alien structure. They tried to wake it up, he realized aloud. Someone activated a sequence. "No," Annalise corrected, panting slightly. "You did." The accusation wasn't angry. It wasn't even fearful. If anything, it was reverent. She touched his chest with her clawed fingers, feeling the heat of his skin through his jacket. Her pupils dilated again, glowing like dual embers. "This isn't coincidence. You were sent here for a reason." "I didn't sign up for this," Gavin said, voice low. "Doesn't matter," she replied. "The temple doesn't care what you signed. It's responding to you, and now they'll want to control you, use you." A second quake rattled the walls. Gavin steadied himself, eyes locked with hers. "Then we find out what they're hiding before someone else tries to use it, and before this thing decides it doesn't like me after all." She smiled for the first time, not with her mouth but with her eyes, her tail curling in slow satisfaction. "Good. I don't want to kill for someone I barely know." He gave her a sidelong glance. "Kill for me." Her expression stayed calm, if it comes to that. And somehow the idea didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. The tremors subsided, but the tension didn't. By the time the alarms cut off and the crew stabilized the shield frequencies, Gavin and Analyze had already retreated to a secluded corner of the base, a narrow corridor that overlooked a maintenance shaft, glowing faintly with the residual warmth of redirected coolant. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Gavin paced while Analyze crouched in the corner, eyes narrowed and tail flicking in thought. Every few seconds she would sniff the air subtly, her glowing pupils following Gavin's movements like a predator cataloging behavior. It wasn't hostile, it was curiosity laced with something else, something deeper. But Gavin didn't let that distract him. Not now. He was still reeling from what they'd just seen. The ancient core beneath the ice wasn't dormant. It was responsive, reactive even. And for reasons he couldn't explain, it was responding to him. That made no sense. He wasn't some genetically engineered liaison or half-alien hybrid, no matter what paranoid theories were forming in the back of his mind. He was a man with a technical background, a military discharge, and too many scars to make it through airport scans unnoticed. Yet when he'd entered that buried chamber, the hum in the air had matched his breathing. The light in the walls had brightened with every step he took. Then Analyze had looked at him like she was watching a flare ignite in a cave full of shadows. He stopped packing and leaned against the wall, rubbing a hand over his face. This base, the crew, none of them act like scientists. They're tight-lipped, twitchy. Half of them don't even look at me. They're not just guarding a secret. They're part of it. Analyze blinked slowly. They were sent here for containment, you were. And why the cover story? He asked, voice low and tight. Why call me in for thermal system repairs if this whole place is sitting on an alien engine? They didn't call you, she said quietly. They were ordered to accept you. Gavin frowned. By who? That's the real question, isn't it? He looked over at her. Her expression was unreadable, but there was no deception in her tone. If anything, she seemed more frustrated than he was. She'd been here longer after all embedded, trained, used, a non-human asset. Analyze wasn't just a scout, she was surveillance. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Why else station a creature who could see in heat and track motion down to the flicker of a heartbeat? Someone wanted her watching the temple, someone expected it to wake. He pushed off the wall. If they didn't request me, that means someone overrode the personnel manifest. Maybe someone inside the directorate suspects what's buried down here is more than just a relic. Or maybe, she countered, standing, they knew exactly what it is, and they wanted to see what happened when you touched it. Gavin stared at her. You think I'm some kind of test subject? I think, she said, stepping closer. Her arrival wasn't an accident. And the way the corps responded, that wasn't random. I've walked past it dozens of times. I've watched teams scan it, drill around it, monitor its pulses for months. Nothing, until you, when you breathed near it, it woke. And that means what? He asked. That I've got alien tech in my blood, some long-lost gene they've been waiting to trigger. Her pupils widened again, reflecting the soft red glow of the emergency lights. No, it means you're compatible. Compatible with what? She looked away for the first time, her voice lowered to a hush with them. Before he could press her, a soft chime echoed through the corridor. Someone was approaching. Gavin stiffened, hand drifting to the compact sidearm holstered under his jacket. Analyze didn't move. He stood still, then took a slow breath through her nose. 2 people. Commander Rake and the second communications officer. They're walking fast, toward the vault. Gavin nodded once. They're going to check the core, maybe reactivate whatever sequence I accidentally started. Analyze's tail flicked sharply. They won't be able to, not without you. A plan began forming in Gavin's mind, risky, stupid, but better than standing around waiting to be locked up or dissected. Then we need to get ahead of them. We get to the vault first, see what changes the system made after the pulse. If it logged data, I want a copy. Analyze's mouth curled slightly, not a smile, but close. You're adapting faster than I thought. Adapt or die, Gavin said flatly. That's what they taught us in recon. She moved beside him, and they set off through the maintenance tunnels again, avoiding main corridors, ducking beneath bulkheads, bypassing biometric locks she'd already mapped weeks prior. Her knowledge of the facility was unnerving, not just technical but intuitive, like the layout had sunk into her senses. Gavin kept up, staying quiet, watching the lines of glowing coolant pipes run overhead like a pooling skeleton. They were halfway to the vault when the first sign of interference hit them. Annalise paused, her ears flicking back. "Do you hear that?" He didn't at first. Then a faint vibration reached him too steady to be seismic. He pressed a hand to the wall and felt it, a constant rhythmic thrum, not mechanical, biological. "It's awake again," she whispered. "The core, it's calling something." They broke into a sprint. The final tunnel was narrow and barely insulated, frost blooming across the walls. When they reached the entrance to the buried chamber, Gavin froze. The door had already been opened. He and Annalise exchanged a look, then slipped inside silently. Down below, Commander Rake stood at the core's edge, his uniform jacket discarded, revealing a mesh underlayer linked to an external power pack. He wasn't alone. A technician stood nearby, inputting commands into a tablet wired directly into the ancient structure. The core was glowing, faint, flickering pulses in tune with a signal that wasn't coming from the base's systems. Gavin scanned the setup. None of it looked sanctioned. "They're running a private sequence," he whispered, "trying to force it open." Annalise's claws flexed against the floor. They don't understand what they're triggering. As if in response, the core flared brighter, angrier. The technician stumbled backward, tablet sparking. Rake barked in order and raised his hand toward the pillar, but the glow surged again, and for a moment Gavin could swear the light bent around him, like the system was rejecting the command. Then all at once it dimmed. Rake cursed under his breath. "We need him," he growled. "Get cross now." Gavin had heard enough. He motioned to Annalise and backed out of the room. They retreated into the dark, silent, and fast. As soon as they were out of range, Gavin's jaw clenched. "They're trying to brute force a system that's keyed to me." "They won't stop," Annalise said. "They'll come for you." "Let them," Gavin replied, cold. "I've seen enough to know one thing. That core is not just a machine." Annalise's eyes narrowed. "Then what is it?" He stared ahead, thoughts racing. "I think it's alive." Gavin barely slept that night. The hum in the walls never stopped, even though the tremors had faded. Lying on the hard cot in his assigned quarters, he stared at the faint glow of the overhead strips and listened to the ice shifting above, the occasional pop and creak like distant thunder trapped beneath frozen miles. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the alien core pulsing to the rhythm of his heartbeat. Not metaphorically, literally. That connection hadn't faded with distance. Even now, buried behind meters of steel and rock and frost, he could still feel it faintly like a vibration behind his sternum. And worse, he could feel the tension of being watched. Someone, maybe multiple people, now saw him as a key, and keys were always used or broken. There was no middle ground. He kept one hand under the thin blanket, fingers resting on the grip of his sidearm, while his other hand clutched a portable diagnostic slate with a cracked corner. It wasn't networked to the main system, but he'd cloned the data before they fled the vault. Raw thermal readouts, power surge logs, strange waveform spikes tied to unknown algorithms, all centering around his presence in the temple chamber. The analytic model he applied came back with the same anomaly, synchronization between his biorhythms and the alien system. He was convinced now. This wasn't something he was simply near. He had somehow become part of it. Whether through genetics, coincidence, or something more obscure, Gavin Cross was now the only person who could trigger the thing's next phase. A soft rapping came at the vent above his head. 3 precise taps opposed, then 2 more. He slid out of bed in a single motion, cracked the grate open, and saw analyzed pale, glowing eyes staring back through the darkness. Her fur was dusted with frost, and she smelled of ozone and cold minerals, but she looked calm. Focused, she pulled herself through the tight duct with the grace of a predator returning to its den and dropped into the room without a sound. Gavin sealed the vent behind her and nodded toward the door, locked it from the inside. We've got maybe 15 minutes before shift rotation. She sniffed the air again, cocked her head, then moved closer. You haven't slept. Not much point, Gavin muttered. Between the core humming in my chest and Rake trying to hijack it behind everyone's backs, I'd rather keep my eyes open. Annalise sat on the edge of his desk, curling her long legs beneath her. Her tail glowed faintly in the dim room, the tip pooling with a soft cyan hue. She didn't blink. I watched them run simulations after we left. They kept trying to replicate your signature, injecting synthetic rhythm pulses into the core's system. It rejected everyone. That's good, he said. Means I've still got leverage. No, she said, leaning in. It means they're going to escalate. They don't want you, they want access. If that requires breaking you down and mapping your response pathways, they'll do it, piece by piece. Gavin stared at her jaw tight. So, what do we do? Go public? Broadcast the findings? That'll get us both buried. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into one of the belt pouches sewn into her suit and pulled out a small, crystalline disc. She held it between two clawed fingers. This is a copy of the temple's latest pulse pattern. I recorded it manually, not through the system. No traceable fingerprint. He took it, turning it over between his palms. It felt warm, humming gently, same as the core. What's it for? Insurance, she said. If they make a move, we use this to activate the next layer of the temple directly, without going through their filters, but it has to be you. It only answers to you. Gavin tucked it away. Then we wait, let them show their hand. But they didn't have to wait long. At 300 hours, power to the lower levels was cut without warning. Gavin was thrown from his cot by the jolt of a lockdown override. Lights snapped off, air vents slowed. A red warning siren began blinking on his console. Manual override engaged in Command Deck 4. Someone had forced isolation on his sector. Not a drill, not protocol, an action taken with full knowledge of who was down here. He was already moving before the secondary systems kicked in. Annalise launched to her feet in the dark, her vision completely unbothered by the pitch black. They're coming, she hissed. Two-man team, suppression gear, non-lethal but direct. Great, Gavin said, snapping open the floor panel beneath his cot. Guests. They couldn't wait till morning. Annalise moved to the door, crouched and ready, her body language rigid with tension. Her fur bristled slightly along her spine, and her tails glowed dim to avoid detection. Gavin passed her the crystalline disc. You get this to the temple. I'll handle the welcoming committee. She stared at him, then shook her head. No, you're the key. I'm the knife. He smirked, despite the tension. Then I guess we're both playing parts we didn't sign up for. The corridor outside hissed open, and two figures in heavy gear entered with flash pulses already charging. Gavin ducked into the hall, staying low as he fired one stun round into the lead soldier's leg. The second returned fire, but Annalise moved like a wraith, dropping from the ceiling, slamming the trooper into the wall with a growl that didn't sound entirely human. Her claws didn't cut skin, but they ripped the man's comms unit in half before he hit the floor unconscious. Gavin knelt beside the first soldier and checked for vitals, alive, breathing, standard stun set up. They weren't here to kill, just capture. That confirmed it. The base wanted him usable, not dead. We have maybe 5 minutes before someone notices they're down, Gavin said. Annalise was already halfway into the maintenance shaft again. Then we run, right to the temple. They didn't stop for anything after that. Through passageways sealed to the general crew, through iced-over bulkheads and echoing maintenance chambers. Annalise led the way, her eyes slicing through the dark, her sense of direction impeccable. Gavin stayed close, the disc pressed against his chest. It throbbed in time with his heartbeat again, stronger now, like it sensed proximity. When they reached the vault, the door was already glowing with faint runes they hadn't seen before. The alien system was responding again, without external input. Annalise motioned for silence. Gavin stepped forward and placed his hand on the door. The glow intensified, locks clicked. The doors parted like parting lips of some ancient machine, breathing out cold mist and invisible light. As they entered, Annalise exhaled in awe. "It knows you're here." "I know," Gavin said softly. "I think it always has." And whatever came next, there was no turning back. The temple chamber felt different this time, not just brighter, not just louder, but aware. Gavin stepped through the threshold, and the change was immediate. The glowing circuitry that traced the alien walls pulsed in smooth, synchronized waves, breathing in and out like some colossal organism. The hum he'd felt in his chest for days now rose in clarity, less like background vibration and more like a heartbeat trying to match his own. The air inside shimmered faintly with a static haze prickling along his arms. It wasn't cold like the rest of the base. It was warm, like the room recognized him and adjusted for his comfort, or perhaps its own intent. Annalise moved beside him slowly, her long limbs tense, her glowing eyes sweeping across the room with a predator's sharp caution. She said nothing, but her posture said it all. This place had shifted into something new. They reached the platform where the core pulsed at the center of the chamber. Gavin paused before stepping onto it. The energy coming off it now wasn't the same as before. No longer passive, no longer slumbering. It felt as though a door had been cracked open, and something on the other side was pressing its palm against the barrier, waiting to be acknowledged. Gavin swallowed down the instinct to turn away. There was no more room for second thoughts. He pulled the crystalline disc from his pocket and held it up. The moment it passed through the ambient field of the core, it lit up, blue veins spreading across its surface like frost catching fire. The pulsing within the alien column intensified. The walls responded in kind, symbols flaring across surfaces that had once appeared smooth and inert. Annalise tensed beside him, tail curling tight to her thigh. "Whatever you do," she whispered, "don't flinch. It senses intention." Gavin nodded, then stepped forward and pressed the disc into the panel nearest the core. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the light surged outward like a wave passing through the floor and ceiling, crawling into the wiring, the walls, the air itself. It was like being caught in a silent explosion made of memory. Gavin staggered but didn't fall. Instead, something entered him. Not physically, not even psychically in the sense he understood, but an awareness, an echo. Words he couldn't hear but somehow understood, images that weren't his flashing through his thoughts. A distant galaxy, a war long ended, a species long gone, a plan abandoned, buried beneath oceans of ice, left for dead until someone who matched found it again. He stumbled back, breathing hard, bracing his hands against the glowing platform. Annalise caught him gently, her hands cool against his arms, her face inches from his. "What did it show you?" He shook his head, trying to force the images into words. Not just a power source, not a weapon. It's a vault, a living archive holding blueprints for something biological, a hybrid interface, not mechanical, something more evolved. Her ears flicked backward, her eyes narrowing. Evolved how? Compatible with organic minds, it's not just reacting to me, it's bonding with me. As he spoke, a beam of light rose from the floor in front of them, casting a projection into the air. A translucent sphere floated upward, rotating slowly. Within it, strands of DNA, unlike human but not entirely foreign, intertwined with cascading energy fields. Annalise stepped forward, reaching out as if the data could be touched. She paused. This is pre-Union tech, older than any known archive. My people thought this knowledge was legend, and now it wants to merge, Gavin said quietly, with me through me. Why? I think it's looking for survival. For resurrection it can't reproduce, it can't repair itself, but it can bond with something compatible and rebuild through that host, not possession, cooperation, like a symbiosis. Before either of them could speak again, the alert siren from the outer corridor went off. At the base-wide klaxon, a local breach alarm. Gavin's hand went to his weapon, but Annalise was already moving to the entrance, her body tense and ready. She sniffed the air, listening for footfalls. Seconds later, voices echoed down the corridor, rake, sharp and barking orders, and others in full gear closing in fast. They tracked us, Gavin muttered, probably tagged the lockdown response and guessed where we'd go. Annalise turned to him, her eyes glowing with focused resolve. We hold the high ground. If they breach that door, the course won't protect itself, but I will. No, Gavin said, stepping closer to the console, where new prompts began scrolling across alien glyphs. We activate the defense layer. This thing's had eons to prepare. If it bonded with me, it should respond to my command. Are you sure? She asked. No, he said, but I'm not letting them tear this apart just to poke through the pieces. He reached toward the console. The moment his palm hovered over the interface, a ring of symbols glowed beneath his skin like an invisible tattoo coming to life. The system recognized him. Lights shifted. Mechanisms engaged. The walls of the chamber began to realign, panels sliding into place, forming geometric patterns that enclosed the core like armor. At the entrance, massive slabs of reinforced stone rotated outward from within the walls, sealing the chamber in a thick barrier, just in time. The outer door burst open. Shouts rang out. "Rake!" voice came first. "Stand down! This is a controlled facility. You're jeopardizing sensitive assets." Gavin ignored him. He turned to Annalise. "We hold them off just long enough to finish the sequence, then we vanish." "Back door?" she asked. "I saw a tunnel in the projection. South ridge of the glacier leads out beneath the old mining ducts." She nodded once, eyes flashing with anticipation. "I'll buy you time." He turned back to the panel, sweat breaking down his temple as new glyphs burned into his mind. The bond was strengthening. He wasn't just accessing the system now, he was connected to it. Every breath felt like it resonated through the walls. Every heartbeat changed the pulse patterns around the core. It was terrifying and powerful and strangely comforting, like being wrapped in something ancient that had waited too long for company. Gunfire sparked against the chamber's outer defenses. Annalise dropped low, returning a precision burst that shattered a drone before it could enter the doorway. Her form moved with ruthless grace, tail slicing the air, claws gripping the floor for balance. She didn't fight like a soldier. She fought like something engineered to survive alone in a hostile world, and right now, she was protecting his. Gavin pushed the last command into the system. The core brightened every circuit in the room, igniting into a lattice of cascading energy. Then the pulse came. A deep, resonant wave that passed through matter and echoed into the depths of the ice. It wasn't sound. It was communication. A signal had been sent. The defenses began to retract. The core dimmed. The room fell into stillness again. Annalise touched his shoulder. "Did it work?" He looked at her, his breath ragged. "I think we just woke up the rest of it." Then the floor beneath them shifted, and a new path opened to the south. It was time to run again. The passage revealed by the shifting floor wasn't made for human feet. The incline was too steep, the walls too narrow in some places, and the surface beneath their boots wasn't solid metal or stone. It pulsed faintly with warmth, with energy, like the inside of something living. The alien construction defied logic. Gavin had seen structures of every kind in his career, but nothing like this. There were no seams, no visible supports, and yet it all held with a kind of effortless cohesion, as if the structure obeyed different laws than human engineering ever could. The moment the floor split to reveal the path, the hum in his chest grew sharper. Every step into the corridor made the resonance stronger, as though his presence was fueling the route itself. He didn't need to ask Annalise if she felt it. Her eyes were locked ahead, tail low, the glow at its tip strobing in time with the pulses in the walls. Other of them spoke as they ran, the gunfire above fatting behind them, sealed off by the temple's autonomous defense systems that had come to life without a single shot from Gavin's sidearm. They emerged into a secondary chamber after several minutes of descent, their breath catching in the stale but breathable air. This room was shaped like a dome turned inside out, the ceiling arching downward, covered in mirror-like surfaces that reflected light from a glowing orb suspended at the center. It looked artificial, but it floated unaided, casting soft light in slow pulses that seemed timed to Gavin's heartbeat. There were no doors, no consoles, no control panels, just the sphere hovering, waiting. Analyze stepped beside him and stared upward, visibly unsettled. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. "This wasn't in any of the base scans," she whispered. "None of the mapping drones made it this far." "They weren't meant to," Gavin said. "This place doesn't open for technology, only for something living, something aligned." Analyze's gaze darted to him. Aligned with what? He didn't answer right away. He stepped forward slowly, placing himself beneath the orb. As he did, it reacted, light flaring, heat rising in a slow cascade like a flower opening under sunlight. The floor vibrated, not violently, but gently, like a voice whispering just beneath the threshold of hearing. A low tone filled the chamber, and Gavin recognized it, not by sound, but by feel. It was the same tone he'd heard in his mind when he first connected with the core. He closed his eyes and let it wash over him. Gavin's flickered behind his eyelids, not memories, instructions, lines of code that weren't code, pathways, designs, a blueprint meant for integration. When he opened his eyes again, the orb had lowered to chest height. A tendril of light extended from it, reaching toward him like a question. Gavin didn't flinch. He reached forward and let the light touch his palm. The contact was instant, intense, not pain, but presence. His thoughts sharpened, his blood ran hot. For a brief moment, he saw the universe the way this ancient construct did, through patterns, connections, energy flows between living minds and inert systems. Then it pulled back, withdrawing into itself, and floated silently once more. Gavin took a step back, blinking hard to clear the residual glow from his vision. "It just gave me a map," he said. "Coordinates, an activation protocol. There's more like this. Other cores, other vaults." Analyzed voice was hushed. "How many?" He shook his head. "I don't know. Dozens, maybe hundreds. But they're dormant, waiting." "For what?" "For someone like me," he said grimly. "And someone like you, it showed me something else too. Genetic markers. There's compatibility between humans and your kind. We were both designed to interface, not separately, together." Analyzed looked stunned, but not in disbelief. Her hand went to her chest, clawed fingers flexing slowly. "That's why I felt it, why I feel you. It wasn't instinct, it was programming heritage." He looked at her, seeing her not just as the hybrid scout he'd met days ago, but as a crucial part of something far older than either of them could fully grasp. "We were never meant to be enemies. We were part of a plan, one that never got finished." Before she could respond, the orb dimmed and then vanished into the floor, leaving the room bathed in silence. Gavin checked the small data crystal again. Its light had changed, deepening in hue, like it had absorbed something new. Analyzed came up beside him, the faint scent of ozone still clinging to her from the earlier firefight. "We need to move," she said. "We're not far from the outer shell of the base. That tunnel system you saw, if it's real, it'll take us out beneath the glacier. But once we're clear, what then?" Gavin slipped the crystal into a secure pouch. "Then we follow the map. We find the next site. We stay ahead of Rake and anyone else who wants to use this tech like a weapon, and we learn what this system is really trying to rebuild." Please jaw flexed. "That's a long road, and they'll be hunting us." He looked at her, and something softer crept into his voice. "I'm not asking you to come, but I don't think I can do this without you." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she stepped forward and took his hand. Her claws were retracted, her touch light, but her grip was steady. Her pupils dilated again, glowing faintly in the low light. "You light me up inside," she said, repeating the words she'd used the first time they met. "Even now, especially now, I don't think I want to let you do this without me." Together, they exited the chamber. The exit tunnel had opened on its own, a wide circular path sloping downward through layers of smooth mineral and humming light. The atmosphere changed gradually, from the dense warmth of the temple to the biting chill of the outer crust. After what felt like hours of careful descent, they emerged beneath a fractured ice shelf, the frozen ocean above casting wavering reflections on the snow-laced rocks. The alien system behind them sealed itself. The path vanished. No trace remained except for the growing connection between them felt more than seen. Gavin exhaled a long breath and scanned the horizon. The planet stretched before them in all directions, cold, quiet, unknowable. But the map had lit up with a new point. They had a direction now, a purpose, and each other. The wind howled low across the glacier's edge, pulling at Gavin's jacket as he climbed the last of the ridge. Below them stretched an endless white expanse, broken only by jagged outcrops of obsidian stone poking through the snow like shattered bones. The cold didn't bite as sharply as it should have. Ever since the activation in the temple, his body felt different. Not stronger exactly, but steadier, more resistant. His breath still misted in the air, but he no longer shivered. There was warmth in his chest that wasn't natural, a thrum that hadn't left him since the core touched his mind. Every step he took felt guided, not forced, not manipulated, but chosen like the path unfolding beneath him had already been walked in another age, and now the echoes were returning. Annalise moved beside him in silence, her pace tireless, even across the uneven terrain. She didn't seem to feel the cold at all, her fur thickening in the wind, her tail swaying low, its bioluminescent tip dimmed to conserve energy. Still, she kept close, eyes always scanning, tracking heat patterns that didn't show up on his HUD. He had traveled for 6 hours without seeing another soul. No drones, no pursuit teams, no signs of orbital activity above. Either Rake had been cut off from higher command or was lying low to reassess. Gavin didn't believe in luck, but he'd take the silence for now. The coordinates burned faintly into his memory. An old mining station, abandoned a decade ago after tectonic instability made drilling too dangerous. Now it pulsed on the alien map like a lighthouse in a snowstorm, drawing him forward with every passing hour. Annalise finally broke the silence. "Your scent changed again." Gavin blinked. "What does that mean?" "It's sharper, cleaner, like your cells are burning off something they no longer need. The system inside you is optimizing." He looked at her carefully. "Are you saying I'm changing?" He nodded, watching him closely, not like mutation, more like alignment. "You're becoming what it needs you to be." He glanced down at his hands. The gloves felt thinner now, like a barrier between something that wasn't quite human anymore and the rest of the world. His thoughts were still his, but the clarity came faster, decisions snapping together with less hesitation. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe it was the system's influence. Either way, he didn't have time to argue with evolution. They reached the remains of the mining station just before sunset. The entrance was half collapsed, a jagged ring of metal and rock forming a crude archway. Gavin stepped over the wreckage and into the shadows, scanning for any signs of power or movement. Nothing. Just frozen metal, half-buried storage crates, and rusted equipment. He moved deeper until he found what looked like a service shaft, covered in frost but intact. Annalise knelt by the hatch, running her claws around the seam. It was sealed from the inside. Someone didn't want anything getting out. "Or getting in," Gavin said. He wiped the frost away and found a manual override. This shouldn't take long. But as he pulled the lever and pried the hatch open, the air shifted. A sharp crack echoed through the snow behind them, followed by the low hum of a pulse rifle charging. Annalise moved before he could. In a blur, she spun and tackled him to the ground, just as a bolt of blue energy screamed past where his head had been. They rolled behind the old mining crate, breath clouding the air, her body pressed tight against his for cover. His heart pounded. She didn't move. She whispered, "Thermal scope, they followed us." He grit his teeth, peering around the corner. A figure in adaptive camo crouched on the ridge above, the faint shimmer of a cloaking field flickering as they moved. Gavin couldn't see their face, but the way they tracked their scope told him everything. Precision, patience, not base security. A hunter. "Only one," he whispered. She shook her head. "One forward, two flanking. I smell them." "We need cover," he said. "The shaft. They'll bottleneck us inside." "Then we draw them in." Annalai's eyes flashed with approval. "I can take the flank. Give me 20 seconds. You distract." He met her gaze and nodded. "Try not to get shot." She leaned in, her lips close to his ear. "Try not to die." Then she was gone, silent, swift, vanishing into the snow with only a flick of her tail to mark her path. Gavin took a deep breath and rose from cover, sprinting toward the far side of the clearing. The sniper fired again, but the shot hit wide. Gavin dove behind an overturned crate and returned fire blindly, not trying to hit, just to draw them in. It worked. The flanking unit on his right broke cover, moving toward him with cautious speed. Then Annalise struck. She descended from the ridge like a missile, slamming into the first soldier and rolling with them across the snow. Her claws raked across their weapon, shredding it before they could fire. The second flanker turned to shoot, but got only half a burst off before she slammed into him as well, using her tail to knock the gun aside and her knee to drive him into the ground. Gavin rose and ran for the sniper. He made it halfway before the third shot rang out. Pain seared across his side. Not deep, not lethal, but enough to drop him to one knee. He grunted and pulled himself behind a ridge. Blood seeped through his jacket. The sniper advanced slowly, cautious, professional. Then Annalise emerged from the blind side, fast and feral, driving the sniper into the snow with a growl that echoed across the glacier. Gavin forced himself to his feet, limping forward as she tore the rifle from the attacker's hands and hurled it down the ridge. "Alive," Gavin muttered. "We need one alive." She paused, snarling but obeyed. The sniper groaned, blood dripping from their temple where her fist had connected. Gavin leaned down, ignoring the sting in his side. He pulled the mask off. "Rake second in command, Lieutenant Havers." Gavin stared at him. "How did you find us?" Havers coughed, glaring. "You think they'd let a resource like you walk away? You're the ignition. The whole system is waking up. We can't let you light it uncontrolled. Then stop chasing us and help us understand it," Gavin growled. "It's not about understanding," Havers spat. "It's about containment, controlling the burn." Gavin is turned away with disgust. "Then you're already too late." They dragged Havers into the shaft and locked the hatch behind them. Gavin's side throbbed with pain, but he pressed forward. Ahead, the tunnel glowed faintly with alien light. The second vault was waiting, and this time Gavin wasn't going in as a guest. He was going in as the key. The tunnel sloped down in a slow, spiraling descent, the air growing warmer with every step. Unlike the freezing winds above, the atmosphere down here felt dense, alive with static like stepping inside a slowly beating heart. The walls weren't just stone and metal, they shimmered faintly, laced with lines that pulsed in irregular rhythms, like blood vessels carrying thoughts instead of fluids. Gavin moved ahead despite the pain in his side, his hand pressed to the wound to keep it steady. The shot hadn't gone deep, but it burned, more from the energy residue than the physical damage. The weapon hadn't been designed to kill. It had been calibrated to disable because Havers and the others hadn't wanted him dead. They wanted him intact, usable, as if he were no longer a person, just an interface they needed access to, and that only made Gavin more determined not to become a tool in their hands. Annalise walked just behind him, silent and watchful. Every so often she sniffed the air, or flicked her glowing tail to illuminate a deeper section of the path. Her ears twitched at sounds he couldn't hear, subtle vibrations, echoes of motion far ahead. She didn't speak, not until they passed through a crystalline threshold that shimmered like water and revealed the vault's entrance. Then her voice broke the tension with a low, calm certainty. "It's awake already. It knew we were coming." Gavin nodded. The second vault was shaped differently than the first, more angular, more closed off. The core wasn't visible yet. Instead, a circular dais dominated the center of the chamber, lined with intricate carvings and tall spires that pointed toward the domed ceiling like teeth. The symbols carved into the floor weren't the same language as the first sight, but Gavin understood them, not with logic, with instinct. As if something deep inside him had been rewritten and now responded to this alien design with clarity, he stepped forward, ignoring the pain, and placed his hand on the dais. It flared immediately, lines of golden light shooting outward, latching onto the walls, awakening the system. The hum began again, deeper this time. The spires rose, unlocking with loud clicks. The dome above shifted, opening like the petals of a flower, revealing its core, and in the center, descending from the darkness, came a shape like the orb in the first vault, but larger, more complex. It floated downward in silence and stopped just above the dais. Gavin could feel its attention pressing against him, not threatening, curious, like a question waiting for an answer. He stepped back and turned to analyze. "Whatever happens next, I need you close." "I'm not leaving," she said, "even if this place tries to tear you apart." Her voice was steady, but he caught something else in her eyes. Not fear, but tension. Protective instinct. She wasn't just watching his back anymore. She was guarding something she had begun to care about. Gavin reached up and touched the side of the orb. This time the connection was instant. Not just light, not just sound, fusion. His thoughts were pulled inward and outward at once. Stories of this vault flooded his mind, how it had been sealed, what it had stored, what it had lost. And in the core of it all, a blueprint for an interface that could bridge minds across species, across systems, across lifetimes. The vault wasn't just a library, it was a factory. It could build, shape, and evolve with the right inputs. And Gavin wasn't just a key anymore. He was part of the operating system. When he pulled away, gasping, his hands were glowing faintly. Not with heat or light, but with latent circuitry, veins of power that had threaded into his skin temporarily. Analyze moved to steady him, her hands catching his shoulders. The moment she touched him, the glow jumped to her fingers, and she let out a sharp breath, her pupils narrowing in response. "I felt that," she said. "The system touched me through you." "It sees both of us now," Gavin said, voice rough. "We're linked, not just to each other, but to it." The orb shifted. A section of the chamber opened, revealing something unexpected. Storage pods. Dozens of them, tall and sealed in thick, translucent casing. Each one held a body. Not human, not beast woman, something between. Hybrid forms, dormant, preserved. Not alive, not dead. These walked to the nearest one, staring through the glass with a silent kind of horror. "These are prototypes," she whispered. "Failed fusions." Gavin stood beside her, eyes locked on the twisted limbs and half-formed features. No, not failures. Tests, versions that didn't have the right link. They were missing something. She turned to him slowly. "What?" He met her eyes. Us. She looked back at the pod, jaw clenched. They tried to force evolution without consent, without balance. That's why it didn't work. Gavin nodded. "We're the first true pair. The system knows it now. That's why it let us in." Before either of them could say more, the chamber lights dimmed. A warning pulse echoed through the walls. Motion sensors activated. A feed appeared in the air projected from the core, an exterior view of the ridge above. Dropships, 3 of them marked with black insignia, not rake-based command, off-world tags, a higher authority had arrived. Analyze's tail flicked once. They found us. "They didn't come for conversation," Gavin said, reading the tactical formations. "They're locking the perimeter, full containment." She looked at him. "Do we stand or run?" He turned to the orb. "Neither we awaken it." The orb brightened. Gavin placed both palms against it and Analyzed stepped beside him, laying her hand over his. The system surged again, brighter, deeper, and the light spread outward in a shockwave. The failed pods retracted into the floor, the spires folded back. A deeper mechanism beneath the dais activated, something massive and hidden. The floor split to reveal a deeper chamber, and from it rose a new structure, a ship. Not built by human hands, not designed for a single species, a hybrid vessel. The orb dimmed and moved into the ship's central cradle, locking in place as its power source. Analyzed, stared in awe. It made this for us. No, Gavin said, heart pounding. It remembered it for us. The outer alarm screamed to life. Dust shook from the ceiling. Gavin turned to her. We can't hold the vault, not against that kind of force. Analyzed nodded. Then we leave with what matters. They climbed aboard together, the hatch ceiling behind them, the interface lit under their combined presence, panels adjusting to accommodate them both. The ship hummed with purpose. It didn't need instructions. It already knew where to go. Above them, explosions rocked the entrance. Gavin slid into the pilot's cradle. Analyzed beside him, claws gripping the seat rail. Ready? He asked. She looked at him, her eyes glowing with fierce light. Always. The vault exploded as they launched, but the story had just begun. The ship rose from the collapsing vault with a roar that didn't echo. It resonated, a deep frequency that sent a ripple across the air and left static clinging to Gavin's skin. He gripped the cradle interface with both hands, trying to keep up with what was happening. There were no familiar controls, no screens or yokes. The vessel moved through will and presence, responding to him and analyze as if it could read their instincts. He could feel her beside him not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. Her tension, her focus, the silent flare of her protective instinct. It poured into the interface like heat into wires. The ship responded in kind, accelerating upward through the glacier's thick layers with impossible speed. One moment they were deep in alien stone. The next, ice shattered around them like glass, sunlight spilled through the cockpit, and they broke into open sky. Pursuit followed instantly. 3 black dropships rose like carrion birds, weapons trained and systems locked. Gavin didn't know what weapons this ship had, or if it even had any, but he didn't care. The dropships fired within seconds, tight beams meant to disable and capture. The alien vessel didn't dodge by calculation. It bent through the air, folding angles that shouldn't exist in planetary gravity. The shots passed through space the ship no longer occupied, and the interface hummed louder in approval. "Do you feel that?" Gavin asked, sweat trickling down his neck. "Yes," Annalise replied, her voice low and steady. "It's anticipating, thinking faster than us. It's reading us. Or we're reading it." Below, the remains of the glacier were disintegrating. The vault had not only collapsed, it had detonated its own inner systems. Not to destroy information, but to prevent tampering, a clean erasure. The black-flagged authority wouldn't find anything left, but they weren't retreating. They were accelerating. Gavin focused, trying to guide the ship upward toward open orbit, but the dropships were adapting, matching their movements. These weren't standard patrol craft. These were precision vessels with high-end AI. Annalise leaned closer to the interface. Her fingers splayed across a panel that flickered open as she touched it. The system lit beneath her claws, accepting her presence, and a sequence triggered. The ship shimmered, then split apart into multiple after-images. Gavin watched their pursuers scatter, confused by the illusion. The dropships circled, searching for the real one, but Gavin already felt the inertia shift. The ship had slipped through the gaps. They broke atmosphere in seconds, the blue of Lyria 9 sky replaced by stars and the dark void. Gavin exhaled slowly, the tension in his spine easing, though the heat in his hands hadn't faded. The interface was still glowing where he touched it, not as bright now, but still warm, still aware. They were in orbit, drifting past the debris field of the old mining satellites that had long since gone dark. Gavin glanced at the side panel. His mind translated it somehow, even though it displayed no known language. It was a map. More precisely, a network, dots lit up in sequence. Not just the vault they'd escaped, not just the first sight, but dozens more scattered across the system. Some dormant, some faintly flickering, and one far off just beyond the rim, burning bright like a flare. Gavin studied it as he did. That's the central node. The source of the design, Gavin said, the heart of the network. Then that's where we go. He nodded, already adjusting the vessel's direction. The ship understood. It plotted the path without delay, angling toward deep space with no propulsion trail, no signature the dropships could follow, but the reprieve was brief. The console pulsed a warning, multiple ships entering orbit behind them, big ones, carriers. They escalated, analyzed, growled. Gavin didn't need details. The enemy wasn't chasing them anymore. They were intercepting. These new ships had no intent to capture. They were positioning to cut them off before they could reach the outer zone. Gavin refocused on the interface and pushed. The ship responded with a burst of speed that wasn't propulsion, but a fold in location. Space bent, light stretched, the stars elongated into narrow beams, and the ship leapt forward, not light speed, something different, faster. The cabin fell into silence. No engines, no noise. Just the hum of the interface, the low pulse between him and Analyze, and the distant thrum of the core resting somewhere deeper in the vessel. The stars outside shifted slowly now. The closest of the enemy fleet was far behind. For the moment they had outpaced them. Gavin leaned back and let the tension roll out of his shoulders. "You all right?" Analyze tilted her head, eyes studying his face. "You're bleeding again." He looked down. The pulse wound on his side had opened slightly from the strain of movement, but the pain was dull now. He waved her off. "I'll patch it. I'm more worried about what we're heading toward." She remained close. "You don't need to worry alone." He nodded, the words meaning more than he could say. As he cleaned the wound and resealed the med seam along his jacket, the ship slowed. They were approaching the coordinates. The map expanded. The final site was a station, not buried in ice but floating among broken planetary fragments. A shattered moon orbited nearby, its pieces slowly drifting apart like glass in oil. In the center of the wreckage, surrounded by rotating debris, was a structure like nothing Gavin had ever seen. It wasn't made of stone or metal. It was made of light. The station wasn't solid. It shimmered with semi-physical architecture like a blueprint brought to life but never fully printed. Shapes moved within it, hollow, suspended, part machine, part memory. It wasn't broken. It was unfinished. Gavin stood it aside, eyes locked on it. This is it. The ship slowed and approached a docking cradle shaped like an open claw. As they settled into position, the vessel synced with the station's resonance. The interface dimmed and the hatch opened slowly. Gavin took one last look back at the console, then followed Analyze out. The station accepted them in silence. There were no guards, no AI projections, no doors to unlock, just open paths of softly glowing corridors that led inward. Gavin didn't know how he knew which way to go, but his feet followed the path with certainty. Analyze stayed close, their steps echoing gently in the light-woven floor. They reached the center within minutes. The chamber they entered pulsed with raw energy. When its center hovered a massive orb larger than the others, more intricate, its surface etched with symbols that shifted even as he looked at them. It didn't glow. It radiated. The energy inside was ancient and waiting. Analyze stepped forward. "This is the Prime Vault, the first interface." Gavin nodded. "This is where it started." The orb reacted to his voice. It descended slowly. Symbols opened around the room, symbols aligned into patterns forming a new map, not of locations but of connections, links between species, between minds, between the past and now. Gavin stepped forward and reached for the orb. Then a new voice entered the room, not from the ship, not from the vault, from a transmission hijacking the system. Gavin crossed, it said, "Step away, we've found you." Gavin froze. Analyze claws tensed. They weren't alone anymore. The voice was calm, clinical, and stripped of emotion. It echoed through the Prime Vault's luminous chamber as if it belonged there, but its flatness clashed with the living resonance of the structure around them. Gavin stepped back from the orb, his fingers inches from contact, eyes scanning for the source. The transmission was piggybacking on the vault's ambient frequencies, patched into the environment like a leech on a bloodstream. The ship systems hadn't warned them because the station itself didn't recognize the intrusion as hostile. It saw it as a command from a higher link, a flaw in the design. Gavin realized something left from an era when the builders assumed the wrong people would never find the right tools. The voice spoke again, slow and sure. You have interfaced with a classified structure. You are in possession of alien intelligence classified under Directive Capus 7. Surrender immediately. You will not be harmed. Analyze, fur bristled. She stepped in front of Gavin instinctively, eyes scanning the corners of the room, though the threat wasn't physical. Her voice was low and sharp. They're stalling, trying to force fear. They don't have a lock on us yet. Gavin nodded slowly, his breathing even, but they're close. He stepped forward and finally laid both hands on the Prime Vault's surface. It accepted him without resistance. There was no light show this time, no sudden surge. The vault simply opened. Not physically, it opened to him. It pulled in his presence, his memories, his instincts, and in return, it offered not answers, but completion. The scattered knowledge from the other vaults coalesced here, fusing not into data, but into understanding. This was what the network had waited for. Not a soldier, not a scientist. A connection between species who should never have trusted each other, yet somehow had. The voice from the transmission grew louder, more insistent. This is your final warning. Gavin ignored it. His thoughts moved like current now, flowing through the vault's patterns. The ship outside pulsed in response. The interface synced in full. He could feel it all power, yes, but more importantly, purpose. The vaults had never been built as weapons. They were seeds, not of domination, but of restoration. A lost civilization had scattered its knowledge through the stars, not to be resurrected in war, but to be shared. But it required something no calculation could predict. Not raw compatibility, not biological coincidence, mutual trust. That's what had made him the key. That's what had made Analyze the other half. He turned back to her, his hands still on the orb. It's all here. The vaults weren't meant to be unlocked by one species. They were meant to be bridged, were not the product of chance Analyze, were the design fulfilling itself. He met his gaze, quiet awe in her expression, but behind its certainty. Then let's finish it, and began to pulse again. But this time, not with her claws met his fingers atop the vault's smooth surface, and the system bloomed. The air shimmered not from heat, but from resolution, not in language or signal, but in action. The transmission on the channel scrambled and cut out. The vault disconnected itself from every known frequency, retreating into its own self-contained field. The map of the galaxy before them began to pulse again, but this time not with vault coordinates, with activation points. The system was waking up. Far across the stars, dozens of buried installations, dormant vessels, and hidden archives lit up in tandem. Not loud, not violent, quiet rebirth, the kind that changed everything without firing a shot. It had begun again, not with conquest, but with cooperation. Gavin let go of the interface and turned to Analyze. Her fur shimmered faintly in the glow, her eyes still locked on his, but now the tension had faded. Not gone, nothing this large ever truly calmed, but no longer afraid, no longer uncertain. He reached for her hand, not the interface, not the vault, but her real hand, Vault's new pattern. It would no longer run. It would guide, not a warship. I thought I was just a tech, he said, voice quieter now. A broken-down soldier with a knack for machines. You are, she replied, stepping close, her tail curling gently around his hip. But you also listened. You chose connection. That made all the difference. Outside the station, the ship aligned with the vault's new pattern. It would no longer run. It would guide, not a warship, a messenger. The last message from the hostile fleet never came. The systems they relied on to track and suppress Gavin's trail had gone dark. Vault by vault, the ancient network had rewritten its own access hierarchy. No more remote overrides. No more human-first protocols. The doors would open now only when minds met in balance. He's looked up at him, the faint flicker of light dancing along her fur. We could keep running, but there's nowhere left to hide. He smiled at that. Then maybe it's time to stop hiding. She pulled him close and kissed him. It wasn't rushed or fiery or desperate. It was calm, solid, earned. Her lips warm against his, her breath slow and steady. Her hands slid up his neck and stayed there, not to hold him, not to restrain him, just to feel him when they finally broke apart, had each other, forehead against his. "You still light me up," she whispered. He closed his eyes. "And you're still the only one who saw me coming." They stood like that in the chamber until the vault's hum settled into background quiet. Outside, the ship awaited. The galaxy had shifted. Power structures would tremble. Hidden players would race to catch up, but none of that mattered now. They had each other, and something far bigger than survival. They had hope together. And for the first time, Gavin Cross didn't feel like a piece in someone else's system. He felt whole, complete. The key had found its match, and the lock had become a door.